Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today we're going to talk about Twilight of the Republic, and this is the spoiler analysis part 3. So, a little reminder on how I rate these things. I am either not excited, not sure, I think the card is good, or I think the card is amazing. So obviously, take everything I say in those videos with a grain of salt. I haven't played with any of those cards, so my opinion is as good as any other. I'm just trying to provide some estimations and some prediction on how competitive those cards are going to be. It's also not a ranking on how good the card is from a design standpoint, but rather from a purely competitive, constructed competitive player standpoint. I'm not even rating how good the card is, so it's a narrow. It's not because I say the card is bad, that it's bad in everywhere. I'm just saying it's not good for constructed premier play, which is yeah. So that's to be taken into account. And obviously I haven't played with any of those cards. So and we only have a third of the set spoiled so far. So obviously many things can change depending on the context and on the potential synergy that can be pushed by FFG later on in the set. So without further ado, let's get into our first card of the day, and it is none other than the Count Dooku leader. I think this leader is pretty strong. It is fairly similar to Palpatine because it allows you to sacrifice unit in order to get a bonus. In this case, Palpatine just sacrifice stuff to draw a card, deal damage. Count Dooku sacrifice stuff in order to make your stuff cheaper. And he does this for free, which is, I think, is very good. In Star Wars Limited, from my experience, basically resource discounts, so things that makes things cheaper, have proven to be extremely powerful. We've seen this, of course, with the old Han, but also with the new Han. Anything that can allow you to ramp or playing things faster, I think is very powerful. The only leader that does something like this that hasn't seen much play is Jabba, is because Jabba's ability is a bit difficult to use, because it has to be, you have to put the bounty, then redeem the bounty, then get the cheaper cost. It's a whole pain. While the Count Dooku is fairly straightforward. All you need to do is to have, you need to exploit, and you need to play, and that's all you need, and you can use his ability for free. And there's plenty of cards in the set that basically play into that. So I think the ability is quite powerful. Then, as a leader unit, is also quite powerful. 5/9 is a very impressive stat line. It is, in my opinion, better than the 4/10 of the Palpatine, and not only that, he's also cheaper. He also has Overwhelm, and he also, his ability now turns to an Exploit 3, which is his ability actually gets stronger as opposed to Palpatine. You very much just get the same ability for free. This ability here allows you to Exploit 3 instead of Exploit 1, which can be significant. So yeah, obviously it does not have the when played ability of Palpatine, which is, in my opinion, the main reason why you play Palpatine is not for his leader ability, but rather for his when played ability. So I don't necessarily say that Count Dooku is better than Palpatine. They're very different leaders. Palpatine is all about this stealing that happens with him. While Count Dooku is all about exploiting his ability as a leader to exploit things. The main weakness of Count Dooku, and the reason why I'm not sure if he's going to see play, is that his ability only works for separatist cards. So obviously, this is going to limit deck building a lot. Right now, of course, none of the expensive, super powerful cards that you want to ramp into, whether it's Vader, like Maul, Devastator, even Reinforcement Walker, all the strong units that you want to ramp into in Star Wars Limited right now, are basically are not separatists. So we're gonna need from this expansion a whole bunch of super expensive, super powerful separatist card that will allow you to put together this deck. So right now, of course, I'm not sure whether this card is gonna see play or not, but I'm gonna be nice, and I'm gonna come from the principle that FFG is gonna give us those expensive, powerful cards. We already seen one, which we'll talk about right after. And I'm hoping that there are going to be more of them, and if there is, then I think Count Dooku has a real chance of being a competitive leader. So I'm going to give him a thumbs up. I think he's going to be strong, and I just hope that there's going to be enough strong separatist units to make him work. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt on this. Next we got the Droid Commando, which is basically a 4/3 for 3 ambush, but only when you got another separatist unit. So Typically, units that require another unit in play for their ability to work are a bit difficult to use in this game because obviously Star Wars Limited is a game where trading happens all the time. It's not easy to keep a unit on the board because not only are your opponent playing removal, but he's also most likely playing units, and units can trade with other units. The other problem I have with this card is the stat line. The 4-3 is not exactly amazing because most of the units in play at the early stage of the game, we see a lot of 3-3 for 2 or 2-3 for 2. Or even 3-2 for 2. Regardless of whether the stat line is 3-2, 2-3, 3-2 or 3-3, most likely Droid Commando is going to die as a result of his ambush, so you're most likely going to be able to trade a 3-drop for a 2-drop. So the fact that most of the time Droid Commando cannot survive the unit he's ambushing is going to be a problem. So yeah, the fact that his ability requires another Separatist, but I can see a world in which this card is going to see play, and that's going to be, of course, a world where we see a lot of 2-3s being played, a lot of 1-4, a lot of 0-4. If there's a lot of that in the meta, then I can see Droid Commando being a very good card. But it's going to depend on the meta. So I'm going to give it a not sure because it really depends on the environment and what the 2-drops looks like. Is there going to be like a lot of 2-drops that have 2 attacks or less, which means that Droid Commando can survive the attack? In today's environment, Droid Commando would be so much better as a 3-4 ambush rather than a 4-3. But, you know, depending on the context, I can see this changing. So I'm going to make it a not sure. It's really going to depend on the meta whether this card like this is going to be good. Obviously, you need to be playing this specifically in a Separatist deck, which limits the options. And obviously, you need to be opening up with a Separatist on turn 1 to be able to make that work. So there's some constraints here that are pretty significant as well. Next, we got the Vanguard Droid Bomber, and this card is pretty good. So first of all, 2-2 for 2. I mean, it's a pretty horrible stat line, but in space, it's not really that big of a deal to have bad stats because obviously there's far fewer space units than there's ground units. Meaning that if a unit that has very bad stat in space is much more likely to survive than on the ground. So 2-2 for 2, it's not a great stat line, but it's not horrible in space. It's still like playable. And the when playability is very powerful, dealing direct damage to the enemy base just for having another Separatist in play. Really, very easy to accomplish. I think this card is going to be pretty solid in an aggro deck, gives you more Separatist cards. So I think this card is pretty good. It's obviously going to be for an aggro Separatist deck, and we've seen quite a few strong Separatist card. I think the Separatist aggro deck has a chance to see some play, and definitely I'm going to be trying it out myself. Talking about the big Separatist card that we need to make Kondoku work, the Invisible Hand is the first one that we get to see. And I think it is pretty fantastic for this specific deck. So why is it really good? Well, first of all, it has pretty good stats. 4-7 for 8. 4-7 in space is pretty tanky. It does have an immediate impact on the game, meaning that if you put a user removal on it, you're still going to be left over with 4 battle droids in play, which is fairly nice. And 4 battle droid is no joke, like you're talking about 4 units that can be exploited or it can just simply attack. It's not a small little bonus, right? There's units who have immediate impact on the game, but it just stuff is like draw a card, or like there's the Venado one that brings a card from your discard back to your hand. Those are pretty mild effect. Here we're talking about a full board of battle droids that can be used in many different ways. And then it has another great asset, is that the fact that if it's not answered, if unit does not actually answer it, the Invisible Hand can really slap you for a ton of damage, because what happens is that he can attack, then you can exhaust any numbers of friendly Separatist units, and deal 1 damage to the enemy base for each unit exhausted that way, meaning that it can actually slap for hate. So it has relatively good stats. It goes in space, so it's relatively hard to kill. It has an immediate impact on the game. And if it's not answered, it deals a bunch of damage. And it is very important. It is a Separatist, meaning that it works with Kondoku. So will this card being played over other expensive late game card? I think possibly. I think this card has the potential to see, depending on the meta, I can see this card being played outside of Kondoku, but for sure it's going to see play in Kondoku, so I'm going to give this card a thumbs up. I think it's pretty good. So moving on, we got I have the high ground. Very situational here. Each enemy unit gets -4, -0 while attacking that unit this phase. Incredibly situational, and it is the same. It gives me the same vibe as this. There's a card that goes, I think it's called Disarm. Give -4, -0 for one turn to a unit. This one is a bit different because it gives -4 to an enemy while attacking a unit, so it's even more situational. So it's incredibly situational, and it's not the kind of card that typically sees in play in competitive. There's many contexts in which the card is pretty bad, and whenever it is actually good, it's still not going to be situational. So it's pretty bad in my opinion. Ki-Adi-Mundi. So interesting thing about this card is his stat line. So I think I already talked about that card. I think I already talked about this card. Sorry, so I'm just gonna skip on it. Moving on, we got Confederate Courier. So Confederate Courier is, in my opinion, one of the most important cards of the expansion for the Separatist exploit archetypes. A unit that is cheap, not easy to kill because it is in space, and that actually provides 2 bodies for the price of 1, is going to be extremely important for the exploit archetype. I think all the exploit archetypes are going to be played on the backbone of this kind of card, and Confederate Couriers is going to be pretty good. 2-1 for 2 in space is not bad, and obviously generating this droid tokens upon defeat is pretty good. So yeah, I think it's pretty solid. It's not amazing, of course, but it is going to be an important enabler for the exploit archetype. Mace Amedda is our next card here, and this card is a bit similar to our friend Dr. Pershing, in the sense that it's a 0x card that basically draws your card every turn. This one requires you to play. One of the advantages of Mace Amedda over Pershing is that Pershing drawing a card does count as an action, so it does cost you an action to use it, which most often than not is an inconvenient. While Mace Amedda ability basically gives you an action. Doesn't cost you an action to do so. All you gotta do is play the unit, exhaust that card, and you'll be able to get through the top 4 of your deck. And so this one does not get you anything. It can only search for a unit, but it searches on the top 4. So if you're playing a deck that has a lot of units. So obviously Mace Amedda compared to Pershing kind of works in any deck that wants to draw a card, while Mace Amedda has to be played specifically in a double green deck, and specifically in a deck that plays a lot of units. Otherwise, it doesn't really work. It does have 2 relevant traits though, Official and Republic, and keep in mind that if you're playing a Palpatine deck, let's say, having 2 cost Officials is very, very powerful, because you play this on turn 2, and then you can play Royal Guard, and Royal Guard will get Sentinel. So, so all this makes it so this card can potentially see play in Palpatine. Without that being said, Palpatine has never really felt the need to draw cards. It's a deck that is pretty late game focused, and usually in the earliest stage of the game, you want to focus on staying alive, not really drawing cards, because because Palpatine is notoriously weak in the early stage of the game, and really drawing an additional card is not really what you're looking to do. So I'm not sure whether this card is going to see play. It's definitely not bad. I just think that there's just not that many decks in Star Wars Limited that really want to draw a lot of cards, and there's also not that many decks that runs double green, so, and runs a lot of units. So that's also like kind of like the main problems of this card, is that it has a bit too many different things that really requires a very specific setup to be working. So we'll see how it goes. It's definitely not a bad card though. Next we got Kit Fisto, sorry. The Smiling Jedi, and this guy is pretty much like very similar to most of the Jedi guy we've seen. It's overcosted here, so 7/6 for 6. Saboteur is so. What's the problem with this card is that, first of all, it doesn't have an immediate impact. It's a 6 drop that doesn't have an immediate impact on the game, and basically for a 6 drop to not have an immediate impact on the game, to be playable, it needs to be an amazing target for ECL, or it needs to do something so extraordinary. Unfortunately, that's not the case for Kit Fisto. 7/6 Saboteur, like, it slaps for a lot, but once again, most opponents in Constructed are never gonna let you attack with this thing. And then the coordinates, obviously it is coordinates, so it requires you to have 3 units in play for this to work out. All of this process of getting coordinate, having a unit that costs 6, doesn't have any impact on the game, all of this makes the card just incredibly slow and very difficult to use because it requires you to have a board. So I'm afraid that this is not really the card you're looking for. Like, just compare this card to something like a Wrecker. Wrecker does have an immediate impact on the game. Wrecker is amazing with combined with ECL, but if it's not played with ECL, it still remains a very powerful card. Kit Fisto really does none of that. Kit Fisto is simply very slow. So this is my opinion. I don't think it's a very good card. Moving on, we got Blood Support. Blood Support is Blood Support is basically this AoE effect that deals 2 damage to each ground unit, and so this kind of effect is really going to depend on the meta, whether it's going to be good or not. We've seen cards like Bombing Run that, in my opinion, are pretty strong on paper, but don't see really any play because the meta simply just hasn't been really good for that kind of card. Blood Support only works for the ground though, but it is significantly cheaper and only deal 1 less damage, while Bombing Run costs 5. So obviously, if you're playing against this kind of like clone deck that puts a lot of clone tokens, or if you're playing against the Separatist deck that puts a lot of 1/1 ground units, Bloodsport is going to be the answer to it. It's going to be one of the sideboard cards, one of the options that you have to be able to counter that kind of strategy. And this is what worries me a little bit about this expansion, to be honest, is that so much support has been given to... We're seeing like all those cards for the exploits and the coordinate archetype, but at the end of the day, those cards are not really that powerful for the most part. And not only that, FFG is giving us a lot of counters to this archetype. We already had a lot of counters to those archetypes already in Star Wars Limited, notably with Overwhelming Barrage, but he's even giving us even more counters to those within the expansion. So that's something that is a little bit worrying to me, is that I don't really see a place where those archetypes can really thrive because there's just so many aid for it. So my opinion about the exploit archetypes and the coordinate archetypes is that I don't see those archetypes ever being competitive, because if ever they become just a little bit competitive, people will start signing those cards in, and then those cards will... So at the best, they can be kind of an ambush archetypes, like things where you are expecting to take the meta by surprise. But if ever they become like part of the meta, they're going to be just so easy to counter. So that's the kind of the thing I'm a little bit afraid of. And then the thing is, like, there's significant counters to those archetypes in almost every color. So I'm sorry, I'm a bit done with my rant here, but this is basically Blood Support. I don't think the card is very good, like, in a vacuum, but I think depending on the meta, it can be very powerful. So obviously I'm putting a fry because it really depends on the meta whether this is going to be good or not. Elite P38 Starfighter, I think is very good. Immediate impact on the game, deal 1 damage to a unit. Dealing damage to units is very strong. Give you a decent body, 3/2 in space is pretty decent, and also triggers when defeated as well. That means it can synergize with exploit, so you can run this and synergize with the exploit. I think it's a very solid card, and I'll give it a thumbs up. I think it's a very solid card. I think it can see play in aggro, in the aggro Separatist deck, but I can also see this play in exploit, in an exploit deck. Even in like a Palpatine yellow deck that likes to ping stuff, so you can take control of it later on. And even like in a regular just yellow-black deck. Well, in yellow-black deck, the problem is that 3 drops in space, there's a lot of competition in that run between the TIE Phantoms and the TIE Advance, and even 3 drops in general. In this would have been a 2-drop, this would have been a different story. Like a 2/2 for 1, a 2/1 for 2 that has this the same effect. That would have been crazy good. But yeah, other 3 drops, there's a lot more competition, so I don't know if it's gonna see play in a more regular like Boba yellow-black decks, but definitely it's gonna see play in a lot of other decks, so that's completely fine. Moving on, we got Mace Windu, which is one of the leaders I was the most excited about, and the reason why I'm pretty excited about this leader is because he's the first heroism leader that is very focused on control. It's a first heroism leader that I think is been designed to be a control leader, and I think that's pretty exciting because we haven't seen any real control heroism archetypes, and that's a bit of a shame. So why is this the case? Well, he has an ability, a ping ability that is fairly similar to Vader. Deals 1 damage to something. If this unit has 5 or more damage on it, it deals an additional damage to it, so 2 damage if the unit has 5 damage on it. Having 5 damage on a unit is fairly difficult, but there's going to be a lot of situations where this can be quite useful. Because let's say give you just an example here, is like there's, for example, you see a Pau Dameron in play, you play open fire on Pau Dameron, then you use Mace Windu's ability, so it's going to be, after the ping, it's going to be at 5, so then it has 500 more damage on it, so then you deal the last 6. So this basically allows you to kill relatively large units with this ability. So what I like about, so Mace Windu's ability, obviously it doesn't deal damage to base, and you have to deal damage to an already damaged unit, which is a pretty annoying condition, but it does basically make all of your damage cards much stronger. So you play like Daring Raid, for example. Daring Raid basically becomes like a 2 resources deal 3 damage, and I think a 2 resources deal 3 damage is a very good rate. I think if there's one other card that just says deal 2 for 3, deal 3 for 2, it would be a very strong card, and basically Mace Windu turn your Daring Raid into that, which is pretty cool. But obviously it has the inconvenience of like you have to use 2 actions to make that happen. First play the Daring, then use the ping, which is definitely a big of a constraint. But I think it still remains a pretty useful ability overall. And there's loads of stuff that deals damage, of course, in red. So I wonder if there's going to be an interesting control decks coming on from this. Then obviously it is a relatively expensive leader, but for a control deck, if you're really building a control deck, I don't think it's that big of a deal. And then you got the 7-8 stat line. And what I like about him is that he does have a when deploy ability that deals 2 damage to each damage enemy unit, which I think is can be very strong once again if you build around it. So you play, let's say you play something like a barrage, sorry, not a barrage, a bombing run or a blood sport, and then you deploy Mace Windu, and then you deal a bunch of damage. And then there's a lot, playing expensive leaders is tricky in Star Wars Limited because if they get dealt with, you're losing so much value. But in this case, you're playing a control deck that wants to slow down the game anyway, so you're much more likely to get into that 7 resources ramp. And 5-8 is no joke to take down, and even if it gets killed in one shot, it still had an immediate impact on the game, as opposed to something like a Vader that needs to attack to really does this thing, while this guy, upon deployment, has already done this thing, and is obviously Force, a Jedi, a Republic, 3 very, very relevant traits. So I have hopes for Mace Windu. I'm not 100% convinced that it's going to be playable, because obviously the competition in red white is so steep, and we're still missing very important pieces. We still don't have like a real wrath effect in those colors, so I don't know if you can really play a control decks on this, and I don't know if this deck is going to be valuable, but at least he's an interesting leader. It is personally the leaders that I'm the most excited about personally, because he offers something really truly different that we haven't seen yet, and he has a chance to be competitive as opposed to other leaders that we've seen. So I'm not sure if he's going to see play, but I like the leader. Moving on, we got the Pau City. So interesting. So we're going to talk about a little bit about those bases that gives extra stat to your leaders. So Tower number 9 recently has made a very interesting videos where he's talking about breakpoint, where basically the crux of his argument is saying that stats are not a linear thing. Like you get an extra stat, one stat equal 1 point, and then you just have to count the amount of stats of a unit and you see how good a unit is. It's not really that. It's something that I've said over and over again on my channel, is that stats are much more about an ecosystem and about the environment. So for example, a 3-2 for 2 or a 2-3 for 2, they're different environments depending on, like a 3-2 for 2 in my opinion in the game right now is better than a 2-3 for 2 because of the ecosystem, because of the ecosystem that we're in. But we're in an ecosystem where there's a lot of 3-3s for 2, there's a lot, so it makes the card stronger. So and the breakpoints idea is that a leader that has 7 health, the entire meta is kind of shaped around trying to kill 7 health leaders. So if your leader is 8 health, it can make it so the leaders are like a lot more, just that one extra point of stat can make a leader from being easy to kill to being very difficult to kill. So I understand all this argument, And so this is the argument for saying that +1 stats can be extremely powerful. And I agree with this. The only problem is that, there's another breakpoint that is very important, and that's the breakpoint of base HP. And we've seen it over and over again in Star Wars Limited with the 30 HP base, right? Is that the difference in a game between having a 30 HP base and a 25 HP base is massive. It is often the difference between one extra action to be killed or even one extra turns to be killed. It just does make the entire dynamic completely different. Another thing to take into account is that in a game like Magic the Gathering, HP is not super important, and you can kind of play the game until you are very, very low HP and still stabilize the game, unless you're playing against an aggro deck that can deal with damage. And the reason for this is because all of your unit can block the opponent, and and there's no two arena, there's only one arena. And every single unit essentially has Sentinel in a game like Magic. So it is relatively easy in Magic to lock the game out in a way that you don't take damage anymore. So you can use HP as a resource to gain advantage on the board and to make card advantage, and then lock the game out. In Star Wars Unlimited, you can't really do that, and that's the reason why healing in Star Wars Unlimited has been so crucial. Because in Star Wars Unlimited, if you're very low in HP, anything can kill you. Either it's on the ground or either into space, and obviously only a few selected units have actually Sentinels. So you turn into it becomes so much more difficult to stabilize. And not only that, because of the way the action system works, you're often going to be trying to take the initiative just in order to be able to stabilize the board. And suddenly you can't use your resource anymore, you can't use your card anymore, because you have to take initiative super aggressively in order to prevent that unit to attack you for lethal. So whenever you are at 28 on 29 HP in Star Wars Limited, that you only have 1 or 2 HP left, that you're almost on the brink of death, it's very, very hard to navigate those kind of situations in Star Wars Limited, because suddenly you cannot afford to let anything attack you, and that is much more difficult to do in a game like Star Wars Limited compared to a game like Magic. Which means that being low HP doesn't mean the same thing at all in a game like Magic compared to a game like Star Wars Unlimited. And obviously one of the best ways to keep yourself healthy is to have a base that has 30 HP base. And that's the reason why we've seen in the meta over and over again, most decks play 30 HP base. You're going to see like 80% of decks play 30 HP base. And the only people who don't play 30 HP base is because they have an insane way to use either Energy Conversion Lab or Tarkin Town. That means that they can basically the power of those cards is so incredibly powerful that allows them to compensate for those 5 HP missing. So the cost, I think, so going back to Pau City, I think so +1 health can be prevent your leaders from being killed, and it can be a break point for your leaders to survive in more situations, but the 4 less HP on the base is also a massive downside. And in my opinion, when you see that cards like Energy Conversion Lab don't even see play in all green decks, there's a lot of green decks that don't play Energy Conversion Lab. When you see that, it means that in order to play a 25 HP base, really the upsides for doing so needs to be absolutely massive. And the +1 health is not even close to that. So in my opinion, those HP base, I'll be extremely surprised if they see any play. I think they are very, very weak. I think the upside that they provide compared to the downside of having less HP on the base is absolutely 100% not worth it. So sorry, I was a bit long on this, but that's because I think there was some interesting debate going on over this specific thing. And I think that the value of having a lot of HP on your base in a game like Star Wars Unlimited is immense. For the reason I explained earlier, it's just simply very difficult for someone to prevent you from dealing damage to you. Next one, we got Mace Windu's Lightsaber, which is obviously our main pro Mace Windu card. The card is pretty solid, right? A +2/+2 for 2, that draws you 2 cards. So obviously the rate of drawing 2 cards for 2 resources is very good. It fits perfectly into this kind of control decks that allows you to refill your hand, card advantage, and card draw can be very good in a control deck. And the +2/+2 stat line is a nice little bonus. Obviously, you need to have Mace Windu in play in order to be able to play it. That's a big constraint, but Mace Windu is relatively hard to kill. So I think it's a card that you probably want to, if you're playing a Mace Windu deck, you want to put a couple of those cards into your Mace Windu card, most likely. Probably not the full playset, but just a 1 or 2 cards in there. I give it, of course, a maybe, because I said Mace Windu maybe is going to see play. Obviously, this card is directly linked to Mace Windu. It's only going to see play if Mace Windu sees play, obviously. Next, we got Twice the Pride, which is a very interesting card. +4 attack for 2 permanently is kind of interesting, but at the meantime deals damage to your own unit. So there's a couple of problems I have with this card. The first of all is obviously it is a double red card, so that's going to be limiting a lot the different decks that can actually run it. The fact that obviously it gives an attack bonus, but does not allow you to attack in the same way. So I think the reference point in there was being Surprise Strike, you give +3/+0, but allows you to attack right away, which is a huge upside. Means that the opponent cannot interact with it. This thing can come out of nowhere, deal +3 damage to your base, and there's nothing you can really do about it. Twice the Pride cannot really do that because you play the card and then the opponent can answer it and can answer it. So obviously the idea is to play this card when your opponent is tap out to try to get a huge thing, but it is a little bit of a Christmas land. It is definitely a lot more difficult to use. And obviously, so there's obviously synergies. You play this, of course, on the 5th brother to deal even more damage on a unit that has grit. So it has some interesting things going on, but it just seems to be, it's going to be a difficult card to use. It's a kind of a cheesy card in a sense that, yes, it is insanely powerful if you can make it work, but in most cases, it's going to be very hard to use because your opponent can very easily answer, because not only does the card is slow because you play and then you need to attack with it, but also the opponent has, it also damages the unit that you play, which the unit is going to be even more vulnerable to whatever removal. Also, the attack bonus also makes it more vulnerable to a certain amount of removal. So it's going to be very difficult to use, to say the least. And obviously, the fact that the bonus attack is permanent is not really super relevant, because obviously, if you manage to attack once with this card, you're very happy already. There's no way you're going to be able to attack twice. The opponent's just not going to let that happen. I still give it a maybe because, as I said, you playing double red deck. There are certain synergies with great cards that can allow you to deal insane amount of damage with this out of nowhere. So this card can really take people by surprise. And if you're playing a double red deck that can run this kind of card, maybe there's some cool synergies you can do with it that allows you to deal a lot of damage out of nowhere. And just that option, having that threat and that options in your deck for such a relatively cheap price, I think is valuable. So I give it a maybe. It's really going to depend on the deck. Next, we got Equalize. So I was at the beginning very excited about this, and then the more I think about it, and the less I think of this card. So basically, the idea of this card is that it can kill 2 different units, give -2/-2. If you are in a meta where there's a lot of small units, obviously Equalize is going to be great, and this is yet another card that will help you to fight against those coordinate decks, all those exploit decks that can put multiple small units in play. It gives you yet another option to deal with those decks. Obviously, it's double blue, so most likely only playable in a double blue deck. It gives you more ways to deal with those pesky shielded, like 7th Feet Defender, but in this case, you already have Make an Opening, which I think is better than this card because the healing is more universally useful than the ability to give a -2/-2 to another unit. Once again, that depends on the meta, but I just think that Make an Opening is just more universally useful than this card. Because this card is really specialized into dealing with, because giving -2/-2 to something just for a phase, if that doesn't actually kill the unit, most of the time it doesn't really do much of anything. Unless you're able to combine it with another effect, but then you really have to spend a lot of resources on this. So overall, I think this card, I give it a try. I think it's obviously not a bad card. It's obviously a card that has its use, but I think it's going to be a lot more specialized than people think. It's really going to depend on the meta, and it's also, of course, that a card that is double blue, so nothing is guaranteed. Then we got Admiral Yularen. So this card is very interesting. So first of all, 2 very relevant keyword: Republic Official. Official, not quite relevant for the Rebels yet, but it is a 2/5 Restore, which is a pretty good stat line. It really is nice. The 2/5 Restore is really not bad. It doesn't really kill much of anything, but that's really not the goal of this card. This card is most likely going to be attacking base and trying to stay alive, so it can provide is bonus to other people. There's a +1 defense to all heroism units. Most of the best cards in the game are heroism. So it just giving +1 to almost all of your units is just very good for such a cheap price and for pretty good stat as well. So I'm not sure exactly what kind of deck is going to be wanting to play this. Probably maybe some sort of like Swarm deck. Maybe it's very good in the hand green decks, that kind of thing. So I'm not exactly sure who is going to be wanting to play that, but I think it's a pretty solid card. I'll give it a thumbs up. Next, we got a Jango Fett. So Jango Fett is actually a pretty good leader. First of all, I really dislike the art. I don't know what happens with this art, but anyway. But yeah, whatever. It's basically, in my opinion, it's a pretty good leader. He has like, so the stats are not amazing, but they're not terrible. It has the stats are pretty decent actually. 3-7 for 5 is pretty much better than most leaders, I would say. Like if you compare to a Han, which is 3-6, this one is 3-7. And the ability to exhaust an unit when you deal damage to it, it's not super strong in a vacuum, but there's a lot of synergies with it. We have Conspicuous Scrum. We have tons of units that are capable of dealing damage to units, like pinging damage to enemy units. So we got the 3-2 Separatist ship that comes to play, deal 1 damage to something. We got, of course, ISB agents. There's just simply a lot of things that can synergize with it. And then obviously, because he's Jango Fett, he turns on one of the most powerful cards in the game, which is Fett Fire Spray. So if you're playing Fett Fire Spray, that's pretty damn strong, right? The reason why, despite this card being pretty decent in the vacuum, is not going to see any play is obviously because of Boba Fett. As good as it is not even close to the power level of a Boba Fett for multiple reasons. First of all, Boba Fett has +1 attack, so it's a 4-7 for 5, which is a big difference. Boba Fett's ability is far more universally powerful. He doesn't need specific workaround for his ability to be good. It's basically just straight up good in almost any deck. So his ability is just far easier and far more universally powerful. And finally, he has also more synergy because Boba Fett's armor work only on Boba Fett. Boba Fett is such a strong card for this deck. So in every single way, Boba Fett is just better. And it's the same price, same color combination, same role as a kind of a mid-rangey decks. So also the exhaust effect, guys, they're not that amazing. They're not that amazing, generally speaking. We saw this with The Mandalorian. Exhaust effects can be useful against specific matchup, especially against aggro, but against anything else, they are often quite underwhelming. So in my opinion, Boba Fett is just so much better than this leader. So if Boba Fett ever gets banned, maybe we'll take a second look at Jango Fett, but right now it is just not great. And I just want to emphasize on the fact that if you compare to, say, a lot of people have rated Mace Windu very, very poorly and rate Jango Fett very highly. And something you gotta understand is that, yes, Mace Windu, maybe in a vacuum, Mace Windu compared to Jango Fett, maybe Jango Fett is better. But the thing is, something you gotta understand is that I will rate higher a card that is maybe not amazing, but does something that is unique and enables an archetype that is unique, rather than a card that is basically just a worse version of something that already exists, even if that card is not that bad. And it's exactly the case with Jango Fett. And that's the reason why I rate Mace Windu higher than Jango Fett, because at least Mace Windu enables something unique, which would be like a control heroism deck that could basically approach the meta in a different way, while Jango Fett is just basically just a worse Boba Fett. So that's kind of where I stand on this. Moving on, we got On the Doorstep, and this card is, in my opinion, the best token enablers that we've seen so far. I mean, there's the 3 Battle Droid for 3 double green, which is very strong as well, but it only can be played in double green, so that's a huge limitation. This one gives you a 3 Battle Droid for 4, but those Battle Droids comes into play ready. So there's 2 kind of decks in which this card can see play. Obviously, in an exhaust, an exploit deck that is able to use those tokens in different ways, or you can, obviously, in an aggro deck where you get 3 units that can attack the base right away, especially if you're playing a deck that can actually give a bonus to all those units. So it's actually quite fun, but this card is actually very good in an IG-88 deck, because if you get IG-88 then suddenly all of your tokens deal 2 damage, so that'll be like 6 damage out of nowhere for 4, which is pretty damn powerful. Obviously, there's loads of counterplay. IG-88 is relatively squishy as a leader, but it gives you just a glimpse of like a different things. There's many different cards in the game that will allow you to boost those battle droids. So being able to have those battle droids come into play ready is just very powerful in my opinion. So this is a very good card, and it's definitely deserves a thumbs up. Next we got Alad Sekura. She has exactly the same weakness as all those other Jedi. First of all, she's actually wielding that sword in the wrong side. The saber should be coming out that way. Anyway, but yeah, the problem with Han Sekura is that she has the same problem. All those coordinate Jedi is that no immediate impact on the game, require coordinate to be able to do its thing, and doesn't even have that amazing for stats. A 6-5 for 5. Nowadays we have 6-6 for 5 in most things. Yes, there's the Force and the Jedi trait, I guess, but for something that's that expensive, I don't think it's that valuable. I don't think the game is really lacking on expensive Jedi. Really what the game needs to enable those Jedi, those full throw, and enable those Force cards is really like cheaper Jedis, cheaper Force units. And this is why the reason why the Yoda sees so much play is because he's a cheap Force enabler. Island Sekura obviously is not that. The attack effect, basically she can turn into a Han if you do have coordinate, where she attacks things without taking damage back, which is pretty nice. But once again, very easy to turn off for the opponent, just to simply prevent your opponent from having 3 units. And obviously, does not even impact on the game, very easy to answer. 5 health means that she dies to tick down, dies to Force choke. So that's a big deal to have. If she was like 5-6, I think she would be better. But yeah, I think there's 5 health. There's a break point between 5 and 6. There's loads of removal that you're dodging by being 6 health. That's the reason why Pau Dameron is so strong. So I don't think it's a good card at all. Despite it being a legendary, I don't think this is a good card. Next we got the Clone Heavy Gunners. This card is absolute garbage without coordinate, and if it does have coordinate, then it's basically the same as a Battlefield Marine, so that obviously is a terrible card. I don't understand why you would want to ever play this in Constructed. I don't even know why the developers would ever make a card like this. I mean, I understand, yeah, maybe it's I feel like the clones in general got the short end of the stick here. I feel like the clones for the most part are just extremely underpowered for no real reason. I think we could be wrong about this. We'll see how it goes, but it feels like coordinate overall as a mechanic has been widely overestimated, and all coordinate cards don't sound to be particularly strong because they're so easy to turn off, and the unit, when they lose the coordinate trait, they become so underwhelming. And even when they do have the coordinate, one thing that makes me really not excited about coordinate, is like, even if you, let's say, just straight up show me the card and you remove the coordinate and just show the ability, even then I'm not like super excited about those cards, even when they have the coordinate turned on. I mean, this would be a 3-3-4-2, which would be nice, but yeah, it just seems to be to have something wrong with those design here. It feels like the coordinate has been overall overestimated in mechanics, which is a shame because there's a huge chunk of the set which is based on that. So it's a we'll see how it goes. But yeah, this card is bad, guys. It's not, even if the coordinate deck does appear, I don't think this card is going to be in there. Okay, next we have the interesting General Grievous. So General Grievous is a very cool design, very flavorful, of like wanting to put all those lightsabers on him. It is kind of has this Exodia feel where it's like the odds of this happenings are just extremely low. So obviously this is a mechanic for casual play, where someone is going to be building that lightsaber thingy deck and around Grievous, and that's going to be good fun. Obviously this is absolute Christmas land, and this is never going to happen for competitive play. So I don't think this is a bad design in sense that it's good for casual play. I'm one of those people who believe that it's not because a card is designed for casual that it needs to be bad for Constructed. But thankfully this card is not completely terrible in Constructed. It is basically a 4-4-4-3, has pretty good stats. And it has the official trade, which, as you know, is quite good for if you're playing a Palpatine deck, you want to turn those Royal Guards. So overall, I give this a try, and the reason why I do is because I am not entirely convinced that a 4-4 stat line is good and is really much better than 3-5. But at least it is different. It is the only units in the game that is effectively a 4-4 stat line for 3. We have another 4-4 for 3 in the game with the bounty, but it has a negative bounty on it. This one is a 4-4 for 3 without any downside. So we'll see. Maybe we're going to be in a meta where 4-4 for 3s are pretty good. But keep in mind, guys, that there's a 3-5 for 3 in the game without any downside that doesn't see any play. But mostly because this card has a lot of competition. This card does not have that much competition in those color combination. So we'll see if it ends up seeing play. I'm not entirely convinced that a 4-4 for 3 is really good enough. But obviously, if it's ever going to see play in competitive, is because it has that. I don't think the ability is ever going to be relevant in competitive unless we see insane synergies around it. But I really would be surprised to see something like that. We'll see. Anyway, we got a Find Edition, which is obviously the card that's supposed to help getting that Grievous Christmas land thing. Needless to say, this card is incredibly situational. First, you need to have an enemy unit that was defeated. Then it needs to be then you need to basically play an upgrade from your hand. You don't get to this upgrade is not free. You still have to pay for that upgrade. You're just ignoring aspect penalty. So if you play this card to play one of your upgrades into your hand, and obviously that's extremely weak because you're effectively just paying 0 just to ignore aspect penalty. So instead of paying with resources, you're paying with an extra card. Needless to say, it is conditional. You still have to defeat an enemy to be able to get that. So it's obviously extremely weak. If you're playing this to play an enemy lightsabers from the discard pile, then it becomes a little bit better. Because at least you're not doing card disadvantage, but it is still absolutely incredibly situational. So it is obviously a horrible card, but it is a fun little card to go with your Grievous casual decks. So that's fine. It's a fine addition to your casual deck, if I can say. So next we got Synchronized Strike, which is basically Admiral Akbar's ability, but on an event instead of a unit, and is obviously a million times weaker than Akbar for multiple reasons. First of all, Akbar comes into play, only costs 1 more resources compared to this, and comes into play as a 1-4 restore, which is well worth the extra, the 1 resource you're paying for it. Yeah, and the second reason is because obviously Akbar count himself among the units to deal damage. So whenever you're playing Akbar, you are at least dealing 1 damage to the enemy units. This card doesn't do anything if you don't have any unit in play, and honestly, to be able to use this significantly, you really need to have a lot of units in play for this to be worth it. So it is incredibly situational, incredibly difficult to use, and if you ever play a deck that can possibly play this card, you would much better off being playing Akbar, and I don't think you want more than 3 Akbar effects into your deck. Already in decks where Akbar has been very good, he's never been played as a 3 of, he's most likely just played as a 2 of, and sometimes people cut it completely out of the deck, even in decks that are really specifically made to make him work. So yeah, Synchronized is absolutely horrible of a card. Not only because it's bad in a vacuum, it's also strictly worse than something that already exists. Moving on, we got the Clone Commander Cody, which I believe is our last card for the day. Another card with another bad coordinate card. No immediate impact on the game. For a 5-drop, that's a major issue. The stats are pretty bad for a 5-drop. 4-4-5 is pretty horrible. Overwhelm is very irrelevant. And then the fact that he gives your friendly unit +1/+1 in Overwhelm is nice, but it only once again turned on whenever you coordinate it. So that is just, as I said, a coordinate. The problem with the coordinates is that I think the coordinate should be, the card is pretty decent, and then if you get the coordinate, you get an extra bonus. Instead, the coordinates are like pretty horrible card, and if you get coordinate, then they are like only slightly above average. So that's kind of the problem I have with this, and it's so easy to counter. This card reminds me of, like, keep in mind that we have like Wedge Anti-Ez, which is basically a 5/5 for 5 that has the +1/+1 and ambush to all vehicle units, and it's not even coordinated. So, and Wedge is already a card that was considered a bad card. Even in set 1, didn't see any play. So this is like a much worse version of Wedge, but in a set where obviously things are going to be more competitive because we're talking about a third set, and obviously with all those the worst stats and stuff. So this card is pretty overall in all sense of the word. So yeah. That's it for today. So overall impression here, right now it seems like the set design is quite different from Shadow of the Galaxy, where Shadow of the Galaxy there were like tons of different archetypes that were pushed. There were some items archetype, the Mandalorian, there were some. While here in this set it really seems to be focused on 2 major archetypes: the Explorer archetype on one hand and the Coordinate archetype on one hand. And it seems like there's only 2 major archetypes in the set so far, which is very different from and that means that in one hand it means that those archetypes are more likely to see play because they have more support for them, which is nice. We have this problem in Shadow of the Galaxy where tons of archetypes, but not all of them got enough support to see competitive play, and in the end only really the Bounty archetype was really the only one that ended up seeing any significant competitive play. The problem I have with this expansion is that there's tons of support for Coordinate and Exploit, but a lot of it seems to just be trash. So it's really like quantity over quality in this set, and so far I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing how Coordinate can possibly function in. Obviously there's still a lot to see in the set. There's a lot more cards that we need to see. Exploit gives me a little bit more hope. I think Exploit can do some interesting things, but as I said earlier, I think it can only be like an ambush archetypes, in the mean that a deck that can be very powerful if it takes the meta by surprise, but I'm not sure how playable it can be if people are basically sideboarding against it. So it's kind of like my worries here. And as I said, since we only have those 2 major archetypes being pushed in this set, if neither of those archetypes see competitive play, it's going to be a disaster for this expansion. So I'm keeping my hopes up here, and we'll see exactly how it goes when we see the entire set, and maybe after playtesting those archetypes are going to be a lot more powerful than I think they are. But for now I'm a little bit worried, and I'm not seeing it, and once again I'm only hoping to be wrong at this point. Thank you very much for following that video, and I'll see you next time. If you like the video, please like and subscribe.